Welcome to the 200th episode of Day Talk. In this episode, we're gonna take a look at one of the most influential rulers from the history of Europe. In this episode, we're gonna talk about Swedish 17th century king Gustav Adolphus, also known as the Lion of the North. Thank you for leaving us a like, and if you still haven't, now is a perfect time to hit thumbs up. It means us a lot. Now, on to the episode. Gustav Adolphus, the Lion of the North, was a king of Sweden who ruled from 1611 to 1632. He is the king who historians credit for the rise of Sweden as a great European power. During his reign, Sweden became one of the primary military forces in Europe during the 30 Years' War, helping to determine the political and religious balance of power in Europe. He was formally and posthumously given the name Gustav Adolphus the Great by the Riksdag of the Estates in 1634. Often he is regarded as one of the greatest military commanders in modern history, with the use of an early form of combined arms. He won his most notable military victory at the Battle of Breitenfeld in 1631. With his resources, logistics and support, Gustav Adolphus was on the rise to become a major European leader, but it was cut short as he fell in combat 1 year later at the Battle of Lutzen. When he was crowned as a king, he was only 16 years old. Adolphus was immediately burdened by 3 wars which he inherited from his father, Charles IX of Sweden. Border conflicts with Russia and Denmark-Norway, and dynastic struggle with his first cousin, King Sigismund III Vasa of Poland. During his reign, he was able to lift Sweden from the status of a Baltic Sea basin regional power to one of the greatest powers of Europe, and a model of an early modern era government. Gustav Adolphus is also known as the father of a modern warfare. He taught a number of other military commanders, such as Lennart Torsten, who would go on and expand boundaries and the power of Swedish Empire after Gustav Adolphus' death. His contributions to Sweden's rise in power included reformations of the administrative structure. For example, he began Paris registration of the population so that the central government could more efficiently tax and conscript the people. He is also widely commemorated by Protestants in Europe as the main defender of their cause during a 30 Years' War, with multiple churches, foundations, and other undertakings named after him. Next, we take a look on King Adolphus' background and the rise to power. Gustav Adolphus was born in Stockholm on 9th December 1594 as an eldest son for Duke Charles of the House of Vasa. At the time, his cousin Sigismund was both King of Sweden and Poland. The Protestant Duke Charles forced the Catholic Sigismund to abandon the throne of Sweden in 1599, part of the preliminary religious strife before the 30 Years' War, and reigned as a regent before taking the throne as Charles IX of Sweden in 1604. As we mentioned, upon his father's death in October 1611, a 16-year-old Gustav inherited the throne, being declared of an age and able to reign himself at 17 as 16th December. He also inherited an ongoing succession of occasionally belligerent dynastic disputes with his Polish cousin Sigismund III, who persisted in his efforts to retain the Swedish throne. In a round of this dynastic dispute, Gustav Adolphus invaded Livonia. It was the beginning of the Polish-Swedish War that lasted from 1626 to 1629. His reign became known from his actions a few years later when in June 1630 he landed in Germany, marking the Swedish intervention in 30 Years' War. Gustav Adolphus intervened on the anti-imperial side, which at the time was losing to the Holy Roman Empire and its Catholic allies. The Swedish forces would quickly reverse the situation. When he died in the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, it was a great loss for the Lutheran side. resulting large parts of Germany and other countries which had been conquered for Lutheranism to be reconquered for Catholicism. His involvement in the 30 Years' War gave rise to the saying that he was incarnation of the Lion of the North. As a general, Gustaf Adolphus employed mobile artillery on the battlefield as well as very aggressive tactics where attack was stressed over defense, and a mobility and cavalry initiative were emphasized. Among the other innovations, he installed an early form of combined arms in his formations, where the cavalry could attack from the safety of an infantry line, reinforced by a cannon, and retire again with the regroup after foray. Karl von Clausewitz and Napoleon Bonaparte considered him as one of the greatest generals of all time, and evaluation agreed with the George S. Patton and many others. He was also renowned for his constancy of purpose and the equality of his troops. No one part of his armies was considered better or received preferred treatment, as was common in the other armies where the cavalry were the elite, followed by the artillery, and both disdained lowly infantry. In Gustavus Adolphus' army, the units were extensively cross-trained. Both cavalry and infantry could service the artillery, as his heavy cavalry did when turning captured artillery on the opposing Catholics at the Battle of Breitenfeld. What comes to Adolphus' reputation and nicknames, his integration of infantry, cavalry, logistics, and particularly his use of artillery earned him the title of Father of Modern Warfare. Scholars consider him an extremely able military commander for his revolutionary developments in warfare, which laid the foundations of military practice for the next 2 centuries. His advancements in warfare made Sweden the dominant Baltic power for the next 100 years. He is also the only Swedish monarch to be styled the Great. This decision was made by the Swedish Estates of the Realm when they convened in 1633, making him officially called Gustaf Adolphus the Great, aka Gustaf Adolphus Magnus. As we have become to understand, Gustaf Adolphus fought many wars and conquered many areas. But what kind of an occupier he was? Let's take a look at an example from Estonia. In 1631, he forced the nobility to grant the peasants greater autonomy. He also encouraged education, opening a school in Tallinn that is today known as Gustav Adolf's Grammar School. On 13 June 1632, Gustaf Adolphus signed the foundation decree of Academia Dorpantensis in Estonia, today known as the University of Tartu. Despite significant hardship for the common people, the period of Swedish rule over Estonia has been idealized in Estonian folklore as the good old Swedish times. Well, at least when compared with the following eras under the Russian Tsars. Next, let's talk about him as a military commander and his death in the battlefield of Lutzen in 1632. In the beginning of the episode, we mentioned that Gustaf Adolphus inherited 3 wars from his father when he ascended the throne. One was against Denmark-Norway, which had attacked Sweden earlier in 1611, second against Russia, due to Sweden to have tried to take advantage of the Russian times of troubles, and the third against Poland, Lithuania, due to the King Charles having deposed King Sigmund III, his nephew, as a king of Sweden. When the war against Denmark-Norway was concluded in 1613 with peace, it did not cost Sweden any territories. Still, Sweden was forced to pay heavy indemnity to Denmark-Norway. During this Kalmar War, Gustaf Adolphus let his soldiers plunder towns and villages. The largest destroyed settlement was town of Vej, which 2 years later was replaced by Danish-Norwegian King Christian IV as the nearby Christiansted, these days known as Kristianstad. The Ingrian War, the war against Russia, ended in 1617 with the Treaty of Stolbovo. This excluded Russia from the Baltic Sea. The final of the inherited wars was the war against Poland, and it ended in 1629 with the Truce of Altmark, which transferred the large province of Livonia to Sweden. The wars were now over, and it meant that Swedish forces were now available for the subsequent intervention in the 30 Years' War in Germany, where the Swedish forces had already established the bridgehead in 1628. When the troops were finally free from other fronts, Gustaf Adolphus began his push into northern Germany in June-July 1630. It is notable that he had only 4,000 men. Still, he was soon able to consolidate the Protestants' position in the north. This was possible due using reinforcements from Sweden and money supplied by France at the Treaty of Bärwald. As the custom was, the troops were allowed to plunder the defeated settlements, but after the Swedish troops plundered the Brandenburg in 1631, everything changed. It was now seen to endanger the system of retrieving war contributions from occupied territories. Marauding and plundering days of the Swedish soldiers were now over. Meanwhile, a Catholic army under Count of Tilly was laying waste to Saxony. Gustaf Adolphus met Tilly's army and won decisive victory at the First Battle of Breitenfeld in September 1631. He then marched across Germany, establishing his winter quarters near the Rhine, making plans for the invasion of the rest of the Holy Roman Empire. In March of the next year, 1632, Gustaf Adolphus invaded Bavaria, an ally of the emperor. He forced the withdrawal of his Catholic opponents at the Battle of Rhine, marking the high point of the campaign. In the summer of that year, he sought a political solution that would preserve the existing structures of the states in Germany while guaranteeing the security of its Protestants. Achieving these objectives depended on his continued success on the battlefield. On November 6, 1632, Gustavus went head-to-head against the imperial army under Albrecht von Wallenstein at Lutzen. The Battle of Lutzen was one of the most decisive battles of 30 Years' War. At a crucial point in battle, in the thick mix of gunsmoke and fog covering the field, the king was separated from his troops while leading a cavalry charge himself. He suffered multiple shots. A bullet crushed his left arm below the elbow. Almost simultaneously, his horse suffered a shot to the neck that made it hard to control. In the mix of fog and smoke from the burning town of Lutzen, the king rode astray behind the enemy lines. There, he sustained yet another shot in the back, was stabbed and fell from his horse. Then, when he was lying on the ground, he received final, fatal shot to the temple. The king's fate remained unknown for some time. However, when the gunnery paused and the smoke cleared, his horse was spotted between the two lines. Gustaf Adolphus himself was not on it and nowhere to be seen. While the search was conducted, his disappearance stopped the initiative of Swedish attack. King's partly striped body was found an hour or two later and evacuated from the field in a Swedish artillery wagon. In the end, Lutzen became known as Protestant victory, but the Protestants had lost one of their most important leaders, which caused their campaign to lose direction and suffer a crushing defeat at Nordlingen. As those Vasa princes who descended from deposed monarchs were excluded from the throne, and Gustaf Adolphus' younger brother had died 10 years before, his younger daughter Christina became his successor, with Maria Eleonora and other ministers governing on her behalf. He left one other known child, his illegitimate son, Gustav, Count of Vasaborg. These days, King Gustavus Adolphus is widely commemorated by Protestants in Europe as the main defender of their cause during the 30 Years' War, with multiple churches, foundations, and other undertakings named after him. He became a major symbol of Swedish pride, and his name is attached to the city squares in major Swedish cities like Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Helsingborg. Gustavus Adolphus Day is celebrated in Sweden and Finland each year on 6 November, the day the king died in Lutzen. Had you heard about this great king before, whose influence we can see and feel even today? Let us know your thoughts down on the comment section. This has been They Talk. Thanks for joining us, and as always, hit that thumbs up for likes and check out our extensive library of 200 episodes.